Welcome to the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be getting and displaying a list of applications are the ones that comes baked right in. But let's for right now just have a void, and we're going to say get all users. Now we'll have to set up a route for this as well, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So for right now, the first step is going to be to figure out how to get the data out of our entity framework database. And that is important. We're not using our SQL data access with this, or we probably shouldn't, because we already have an entity framework solution set up. So we need to work with EF to get the information out. So let's start by just getting the information and seeing how it looks. So var start with user store equals new user store control dot to add the using statement for entity framework. Get the user store for the application user. Again, control dot to add a link to the models folder. And then we're going to pass in context, which I don't have right here. So let's actually do this. Let's make control X is easiest and get my context. So var context equals new application DB context. And there I can use the context. There we go. So now we have a context to create our user store. And then from there, I'm going to create a user manager. So user manager equals new user manager of type application user. And this is going to pass in the user store. To get that, And now from here, I can do something like var users equals user manager, oops, lowercase, user manager, like so, user manager dot. But we're going to get there. So let's wire this up as an HTTP GET. And we're going to have to set up a route for it because this is not going to be a standard route. So instead, let's say we're going to call this, this would be user slash admin slash get all users. Let's try that. Oops. There we go. And now let's put no, let's actually take authorization off of this so that here, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's say allow anonymous here. Now we can take it off and it's close to where we're modifying it. So I'm just going to create this just so we can call it directly from the API web page. Just want to see that it's there and then call it. So this is loading up. Once it does, we're going to go to our Swagger. Under user, we have admin get all users. We can say try it out. And we go here. Now if we go to our locals window, we can see the users, which is only one user. Inside there, we have 0 claims. We're not using claims right now. But we have email address. Email is not confirmed. There's the user ID. Lockout is not enabled. 0 logins. There's a password hash. And then down here we have roles. And inside of roles we have 2 values. We have the role ID and the user ID. And we also have, right down here, we have role ID and user ID. So let's look at what information we want to capture. We definitely want to capture the email address, the ID, and the roles. But the roles is interesting because we're going to have a role ID for each of these, but not the actual role name. Okay, so we're going to say email address, which is email. So ID, email, and then we'll capture the roles. We're just going to capture the role ID because it's for this user. Okay, so that's the users so far. Now let's look at roles. Well, we can say var roles equals, and then say context.roles.toList. And now we can run this again, make the same call and look at the roles list to see what we get. So there's Swagger, users, make this call, and now roles, we have 3 values. We have the ID and the name, so there's admin. We have the ID and the name, there's cashier. We have the ID and the name of manager. Now also notice they also have a users down here, which does tell us there's one user in this one, and it gives us the role ID and user ID for this role. So now we have this array which has ID and name, and that's where we're going to link up with the users. So let's stop this. So let's create the models that I want here. So let's create a simple user model. So we're going to say user, so let's say application user model. And that does not conflict with application user. So let's say application user model, and we're going to have a string for ID. We're going to have a string for email, and then we're going to have a list, and let's just say list a string for right now, but it's going to list something else that is roles. Let's actually do, instead of a list of string, let's do a dictionary of type string for roles. Okay, so now we have an ID, email, and a list of dictionary values. Okay, now what I'm going to do could probably be done with link and joining these two together, but that's going to be complicated. And instead of messing with that, I know this will work, and so I'm going to go this direction and maybe come back and refactor it at some point. And if you want to leave a comment in the description on how you refactor it, I'd love to hear it. But I'm just going to do a simple loop for each of my users. Okay, so let's do a for each user, let's just do var user in users. So loop through each one of the users that's been found, which right now is only one, and we're going to create a new application user. It's application user model. And we're going to say that this is u equals new application user model. And let's actually even pre-populate it with the ID equals user.id. The email equals user.email. Let's stop right there. Now we need to fill in the dictionary list, which, by the way, that dictionary list is probably not, it's not instantiated. That'd be a problem. Now it's instantiated. And so we're going to say for each, and let's loop over the r in user.roles. So for each role in the roles, then we're going to add something to this list. We're going to say, okay, let's grab it from a dictionary. Well, u.roles.add, we need a key, which would be our user. Actually, nope, it's going to be the first entry in our list, which we're not looping over yet. So let's do that. Let's cut this out and do a for each on, this is going to be user role in user.roles. So I'll loop through those roles, and then, no, we're not. Wow. Let's undo that. Sorry, I thought I was looping through the other roles. This is where it gets a little confusing. This is why probably a link would help us with this. In link, we just join these two together and then create a new object, but this is going to be a manual process for it. It is in some ways easier because it does show it, but it can also be complex. So you're going to loop through every role and say, okay, we're going to add that role. So r.role ID, that's the value to add for the key. But what's the value? What's the name of the role? That's the value. We can do some quick link here and say roles.where x arrow function x.id equals r.role ID. First oops, double equal. And this is going to be first or default. And then we're going to have dot and the name. So actually, let's not do first default. Let's do first. So first dot name, and that's going to be the name of that role. Do we have one too many parens here? I think I might. Let's see, we have 1, 2 are open, 1, 2 are closed. So yes, we have one too many parens. There we go. So now it's going to add the role ID and the role name for every role the user has. At the end of this, we just need to add it to a list. So let's create a list. Let's do it even outside this and say list of type application user model output equals new list. And then down here we can say output dot add u. Okay, that new user. After this right here, after we have our breakpoint, we can just say return output. And now we're returning a list of application user model, which, by the way, I'm going to change my type from void to list of application user model. And now this should give us back just myself, because that's the only user we have right now. But I should give it back me, and it should say what my roles are. So user, let's say try it out. The value we get back is the ID is this, the email is this, and the roles are here's one ID and admin, here's the other ID and cashier. So that's the roles that are assigned to me. So that's all you really need on the server side, on the API side. We now have a way of getting all the values or all the users and what roles are assigned to them out to the API level and beyond. Now, we're going to take this off and we're actually going to assign it to be only an administrator can do this. So let's just do that now. Authorize roles equals administrator, which I believe I am one. I should have looked. I think we have administrator, manager, and cashier. Nope, it's admin. Well, let's change that. That's why it's good to check. So admin. That way I should be able to have access to this when I'm logged in as myself. All right, so we have authorize, we have HTTP GET, and we have the route. So now let's leave that open, but let's minimize this and go over to our desktop UI library. And let's look at the API helper, which that's not what we want, I don't think. It is not. We want to have a helper for, or an endpoint for users, which we don't have right now. All of the user stuff comes from the API helper directly. So that get by ID is probably in here, I believe. So this is get logged in user info. So /user, yep. And that's where that get by ID is being called. So we're going to create an endpoint like we have here. In fact, let's just copy this code right here. So we have a sample to work from. And now I'm going to say add new class. And this is going to be the user endpoint. And we got public. And then I'm going to create a constructor. And we're going to bring in the IAPI helper. And what do we call it over here? We called it API helper. Like so, and then control dot to add that private field. And now I'll paste this in and comment it out. So I have an example of how to make this call, since it's been a bit since I've worked with endpoints. And that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to forget what you did or the exact pattern of it. The worst thing you can do is just kind of plug along and assume what you're doing, because then your code will be subtly different every time. And that's painful, especially when one of those subtle differences has a bug. So do it new every time, or do it as a mirror of what you've done before. So public async task of type list of type, and that's going to be application user model, which you don't have yet. We're going to say get all users. Or just get all and follow the same pattern. Like so. Now we don't have the application user model, so let's create that. Add our class for application user model. And actually, let's just call it user model. There's no reason to have application user model. Let's just call it user model and make it public. And we have our application user model up here, which for right now I'm going to copy and paste because there's no real difference. We can say using, there we go, HTTP response message. Response equals await API helper.API client.get async. And this is going to be, the path is API/user/admin/get all users. Like so. And now in here, if the status code is successful, if response.isSuccess status code, then var result equals await response.content.read as async, and the type is going to be a list of user model. Like so. And then we can just return result. Just like we're doing down here. It's a mirror. Else throw new exception. We're not checking for what type of exception here. We're just saying throw an exception and say response.reason phrase. That's where we get that unauthorized from. So now that we have that, we have a method to actually call to get all the users. So now we can create our interface. So extract an interface, hit OK, hit save, and now we can add this interface and implementation to our user interface in our Bootstrapper. And that should be down in here where we have our iSales endpoint, we now also need a per request for and its user endpoint, like so. And now we have that as well. So now we have it registered in our dependency injection system for our front-end WPF application. So now that we have that in place, we can start working with that data. So let's do this. Let's go to our view models and let's create a new view model. So a new class, and we're going to call this the user display view model. Make it public, and I believe we'll inherit from screen like all these do. Yep. So we'll inherit from screen, control dot there, and now we can do is we can capture the various pieces that we need. Now let's actually follow the pattern of the sales view model here. So here we have our constructor. We'll get to that in a minute. But then we have this protected override async on view loaded, and that's where we do the actual product load. Let's do that here as well. I'm actually going to copy and paste this entire thing. In fact, I'll copy and paste the load products as well. And then I'll come down here and I will paste it. Now we're not going to do load products, but that's okay. So now we have our on view loaded. Let's leave the exception handling in place. So we're going to add our using for expando, add our using for system.windows, and then we have our status, which we have to bring in from our constructor. So CTOR, and in here we have our status info view model. We're control dot to add that. And then we have our iWindow handler, or window manager. Our control dot to add that field. And now this is all working the way it should. Except for the fact we're not loading products, we're going to be loading our users. And the reason we do the on view loaded is because we want to wait until the view loads before we start getting the data to then populate it, since we're doing it asynchronously. So let's say load users instead of products. And we'll come down here and actually change that name to load users. But we're going to say that we need an endpoint here, and we need the user endpoint. So we ask for that. iUser endpoint, control dot to add our using statement, and say user, initialize that. And actually, we call it product endpoint. So let's do the same thing here, user endpoint. And let's get rid of this and do it again. That way it's just a little quicker than trying to paste it and make sure I got it everywhere. So user endpoint. Now I can down here say so let's create that right up here. Let's kind of minimize this, and we're going to create a public list of user model, control dot. So list of user model, and we're going to say this is users, and we'll have our get, which is going to be a return users, which we don't have yet. So let's create that. This is a full property. I could have done a full prop full. I'm just going to do it manually. So list of user model users, like so. And now you can return that. We also have a set, which is going to be users equals value, and then notify of property change, and this type users. Now instead of list, this should be binding list. So let's do that. I did my control dot to add the using statement there. And now we have this, which is a list, not a binding list, a list. We can say users equals new binding list and pass in a iList or a list of user model. So user list. And now it's going to create for us our new binding list with all of our users populated in it. After that, what we need to do is we need to display these users. And that's where our view model comes in. I'm sorry, our view. So this is user display view model. So we're going to add a new user control called user display view. I'm going to increase this a little bit. I'm going to go over to my my sales view, and I'm going to copy most of this, a lot of this. Let's start with the ignorable, and then I'm going to copy the rest. And yes, I know we're going to delete a lot of this stuff, but that way I know where I'm copying to. I'm copying to the grid, the bottom of the grid. And now I'm going to go from my ignorable to the bottom of the grid. And now I have the exact same thing as a sales page. And I can just start modifying it. Again, keeping the same feel to the page. So let's just say this is the user administration. And we're going to have, instead of having a to lists right now, I think what we're going to do is let's get rid of this center column. So everything in here in column 1 we can get rid of. Don't need it. And everything in column 2 we can get rid of that as well. And down below we have our subtotal, total. We don't that's going to be users. And we're going to want to have multiple pieces of information about this user. So we're going to start off with the email address probably. The front end doesn't really care about the ID, so let's just show the email address. And if we look, let's save everything. Let's close everything but this. And let's come down to our user model, which is ID, email, and then roles. So this would be email. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a full property. So I'm going to type string and say, let's call it roll list. Roll list is probably fine. Like so. And we'll get rid of the private backing field. We'll get rid of the set. And I could just type this out. That's what it comes down to. Whenever I type it out, I'm like, oh, I should use the snippet. But whenever I don't type it out, I'm like, or whenever I do type it out, I'm like, oh, it's so long. Or don't type it out, it's annoying. So, anywho, let's do this. Let's do, first of all, return nothing for right now. We're going to loop through all of our roles and create a comma-separated value. And this is actually not too hard to do. So what we're going to do is say return string.join. We're going to pass in, first of all, a separator, so a comma, and then our list, which is roles. And that's going to create for us a comma-separated, and actually we need to change this a little bit, roles.select x equal, or x arrow function x dot value. Okay? And the reason why is because you have this dictionary list, not as a list of string. And so I said, well, actually create a list of string first, which is without anything else. Let's start there. So let's just do text block text equals binding, and it was role list. That's what it was. I'll verify that in just a minute. And I'll delete the stack panels. No reason to have those. So now we have our role list, and yes, it's called role list. In theory, this is going to have a list of users with their roles listed underneath as comma-separated values. Let's see how it looks. We can also make this a little wider. So, actually, we don't have a max width. We'll probably have to add that because our role list might get a little long at some point. But with no max width, I think that's fine. So let's call that good. And now let's add this to our shell view. We have the menu items. So now you have the file menu. We also have log out and exit. So we have a file menu and account menu. That's what we have. So let's create another menu. And this one we're going to call users. And we'll say user management. So we'll have user, and user management is the name of the call. And we're going to say this is user management, like so, and the underscore will be in front of the M. So it's the M is what's going to be used to access that value. So we can copy this. We can go over to our shell view model and look at our different methods here. We have log out, we have exit application, and we now have public void user management. which what this is going to do is it's going to do a call just like this. So it's going to activate an item, and this item is going to be the user display view model. That's what's going to activate. That should be all we need to do. We're going to find out in just a minute. I have not restricted anything here or hidden this in any way. It should be that it just works, which if you've been a developer for any time at all, you know that that phrase just about dooms me to having an error here somewhere. Wait for the API to load. I'll log in. I'm now logged in. I can go to Users, User Management, and not found. Excellent. And it crashes. I'm wondering if it's the API endpoint, so let's go to Swagger. And the endpoint is actually admin. Instead of API/user, it's /admin/get all users. That's not quite right. We rework the URL somewhere else. We do right here. And it's get cellular port with no API. Excellent. So let's do API/user/admin/get all users. So let's do that. API/user we have to add on to that. So let's come down to our API endpoint. See, I knew this was something going to be needed changed. Down here in our, well, that's not it, but let's go ahead and get rid of our test code. Not our user endpoint. We actually have to go to our controller, user controller. There we go. And we need to say API/user/admin/get all users. And then let's verify what we're calling in that user endpoint. API/user/admin/get all users. So that's correct. At least now it is, in theory. Let's try it again. Log in. Go to Users, User Management, and there we go. Tim Corey is an admin and a cashier. From the form, the font size is 24. Let's change this font size to be, let's go with 18. Makes it smaller. And then let's add a space after the comma. That way we have a little more better separation. And let's run that again and see if we get something a little more valuable to display. So log in, users at user account management. There we go. So there's a space there and it's smaller and it indicates that these are the roles that we're in. Okay, so that's all there is for this video. There's some complicated parts in here, but at the same time, I think that looking over them and following the same example, you'll see how it's done and be able to do it yourself. So we gathered information about the users and the roles from the entity framework system, and then we passed that all the way through the front end where we displayed it, and we even did some formatting on our roles so that it made it a little nicer to view. Okay? There's a lot more we could do, but I didn't want to spend another hour or two making this pretty, so I just want to get it done and show you. We can move on from here. This is more of a demo than it is a full-blown application. I'm trying to get the pieces in place, even if they're not the prettiest and even if it's not complete. some refactoring changes to make this application even better. Okay? Thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.